and those of us who are also watching us on Twitter. Later on, you might also be seeing the recording of this talk at a future date. This talk on how I have started a robotics. Today's talk on how I learned hardware is hard is hosted by Anthill Inside. I'm Zainab Bawa, co-founder and CEO at Hasgeek. I'm filling in for today's moderator, who's yet another victim to the viral flu fever going on in Bangalore. So yes, you'll be seeing me here today interacting with Soumyadeep. Until Inside is a forum to discuss everything AI. I know GPT-4 has taken the world by storm. As of this morning, I've been seeing a lot of people who've been telling me their boards have been rocked. So we'll see more of what comes that way. But Until Inside also looks at various aspects of the pragmatic aspects of large volumes of data, including the challenges of data quality, labeling the data, and then going on to looking at far more deeper problems of artificial intelligence in terms of harms, in terms of privacy, etc. So if you'd like to learn more about Anthill Inside, you can follow Anthill Inside on hasgeek.com, and you can also join the Telegram group that exists. I'll paste a link about the Telegram group shortly. Anthill Inside is a community that has grown under the umbrella of Hasgeek. Hasgeek is a platform for collaborations across practitioners, including design, technology, law, policy, etc. And Anthill Inside has recently launched a subscription option which allows you to participate in online and offline activities and to stay up to date with what's happening in the world of technology. I'll encourage you and everybody to subscribe. And if you are already a subscriber, consider gifting a subscription to someone that you'd like to introduce to this community. Today's session is under a new vertical under Anthill Inside, and this is around robotics and hardware. I think there's been a lot of excitement in India around emerging tech, and robotics and hardware clearly are in the center of the discourse around emerging tech. We're starting this track by looking at the challenges of running robotic startups in India and what are the strategies that companies are now looking at in terms of building a market. Kickstarting this track today is Soumyadeep Mukherjee, founder at Dashtoon, and he will speak about his journey as someone who has tried to build a robotic startup and has failed thrice. Talk about being braveheart. So, with that, I'll hand it over to Soumyadeep. Over to you.
Hey, everyone. So, yeah, I think this talk would be less around technology, but more story. It'll be a lot more on what I tried, what failed, what worked, and how I kept iterating. And yeah, I'll start by giving a short introduction of what I'm doing today. So today I'm not working on hardware like since December of 2022. And what I'm doing is I'm a co-founder of a startup called Dashtoon, where we are trying to build TikTok slash YouTube for comics using generative AI. So as probably a lot more into the generative AI world, but this talk is more around my 3 attempts and what I learned and what I think my takeaways were, and feel free to anyway drop messages or comments. And a lot of these learnings are something that are common, a lot of these are may not be common. So let's see how that goes. So yeah, I have 3 attempts. There are 3 attempts of different problem domains that I have made. Like first was just my own startup, which failed before it even took off. I'll talk a little bit about it. Then I was an early engineer, or rather the first engineer after two founders in a startup, and we built the entire product till n number of deployments. I'll talk about that. And then I moved to start the team in a mid-stage startup, Udaan, uh, to solve certain set of automation problems used through the hardware or a robotics lens, and how my journey went there. And I'm going to talk a lot from a story as to how I did things, how we did things, what failed, what succeeded, and what challenges and then probably I will end up having some takeaways that, okay, these are the things that I definitely know that next time I don't want to do. Cool. Let me start. Right. So I start by talking about my first attempt. First attempt, what we called was a Saturn cart. What we wanted to build is like a pick up and go experience for an Indian retail. A lot of you would have seen an Amazon Go video, which is you go into a grocery shop, you pick something and you leave, and everything happens offline. We wanted to build something like that for an Indian retail. And the way we built that was because we didn't want to change the infrastructure of the area that like Amazon Go does, what we did is we built a small IoT setup on an existing shopping cart with a phone camera. And the idea was that using the phone camera, anything that goes inside automatically gets tracked, and anything goes outside gets automatically gets tracked. And on the way out, you can check out on the phone. So basically, no queues for you as a grocery shopper or a retail customer in today's the Spars and the hypermarkets of the world. So that was the core idea. Now, why did we even want to start this idea, right? Like, it wasn't, I wasn't as stupid. This was 2016, wasn't as stupid that I would build out without knowing any feedback. So we did talk to a lot of retailers, and it turns out that they were interested in solving the problem of queues, because less queues would mean more footfall. More footfall is more money for the retailers. So we figured that out. The moment we figured that out, that's after which we started building an MVP. And the MVP took 3-4 months because we were part-time into this. We had our day jobs. Took 3-4 months, and then we went straight to sales. So yeah, then we went straight to sales. So as part of sales, like, we talked to most of the retailers that we have in India. And one of the things that interesting things we realized is that most retail companies in India or grocery retail roll up to a few big companies like the Goenka Group or the Spar chain, and they roll up to a 3-4 companies. And all of them's technology heads are similar, or they have moved around so much that they know everything about that industry and know each other. So while the sales was easy, that makes the sales a little easy because you have a less number of points to reach out to, but it also makes it hard because if someone else is there before you, then you lose out completely because everything, like, you get to deploy everywhere very quickly. And that's something that happened with us. There was a competitor that we had who moved faster than us, who did not have a pick up and go solution. They just had an app, and they made sure that they sold first and converted customers, and then told the retailers that we will make a pick up and go experience down the road. And that is something which was probably a better strategy, that instead of trying to solve the entire problem using a good hardware solution technology, building a very, very minimum viable product, that they did, like, which, and threw people at it to first get the customer. And they beat us to that. And today they are a fairly bigger company and even got acquired, but they beat us to that. But the idea was that they managed to be far leaner than what we were. They managed to get the customers. And by the time we reached to the customers with a probably a better product, we were we learned that it was for the retailer, it made no sense to also engage with us. They said, why don't you engage with that company, with which did not make sense for us. But at the end of the day, the first mover advantage is what they got because they were leaner and they shipped a solution faster than us. So I think that's my first journey. And one of the major learnings from this was, like, so it is important that we solve the core problem, and MVP has to be far more minimal than what you would think a product is. Like, if you can throw people at the problem and solve it today and sell it, it has a lot more value than making a perfect product. So it's not like we were even trying to make a perfect product. Our solution probably worked on probably 70% of SKUs in a shop, but yet 70% was not good enough. And we could just put a person into the picture, and the 70 would have been 100, and we could have shipped faster. That's one of the major learnings that came from this. This was a smaller journey for me. We were on this for 10 months part-time. We were talking, we were building, we were trying to convert our sales. But the major learning was that we were just beaten to the market by a player with a much leaner product. And that's the key thing that we learned from the first journey that we had. So yeah, next. So after 10 months of this effort, we finally gave up on this, and we decided that, okay, let us find something else. Me and we were 4 of us at that point of time. 2 of us decided that we'll find something else together, and together we found a very, very early company who were just trying to build the product called Morphle Labs. And they were just two founders at that point of time, and we both joined as the first two engineers. So the idea of Morphle Labs was pretty interesting. And like, so today I'll what the goal of that of the Morphle Labs is was to build digital pathology scanner. What does that mean? So today pathologists, when they watch, there are slides that you make, medical slides, right? For example, blood slides, tissue slides, biopsy slides, they watch under a microscope. So under a microscope, like they have to keep moving left, like on the XY axis, they have to keep zooming in, zooming out on the Z axis to see a crisp thing. And then they have to even take readings on paper or on a computer for that matter, that, okay, I saw this, I saw this, I saw this. And that is when you can finally take a decision. Another challenge that comes is that often there are architectural things in the human tissue which you cannot see in the maximum zoom. You have to zoom out a bit and then see. And that is a very hard experience for a pathologist. That's one set of problem. The other set of problem was that since nothing was digitized, you're still under a microscope, right? There, you cannot have assistive tools for the pathologist, which means that you cannot help the pathologist to make better decisions. There is no strong objectivity. Most objectivity comes from SOPs and not real systems in this yet. And that's something that we think was a problem. And this was a fairly bigger problem. And I'm not even talking about the how much uh, scope it brings in the moment you bring everything on a digital platform around diagnosis and even getting as deeper into cancer diagnosis. So that was the aim of what we were trying to build. Now the next, now what we decided from there is, okay, what we are going to build is a very simple system. It is going to be a 3D printer where instead of the, if anyone has seen a 3D printer, it moves on the XYZ axis and it can print things. Now remove the printing aspect with a camera and an optic setup. That's primarily what we wanted to build. But of course, easier said than done. So yeah, post my joining Morphle, I think the first stage was that we went to the we already had figured out the problem, as I discussed, and the problem is fairly intuitive, right? That people do want easier diagnosis. People do want objective diagnosis. People do want more slides that they can see, or they don't want to see non negative slides, right? They don't want to see slides which do not have an issue. And to prune that thing, because already the doctor patient ratio is fairly bad across the world, not just in India, right? So now what we decided is, okay, we went to the doctor and they said, okay, give us something like this. So we built a very simple MVP with a scanner and with a 3D printing setup over a camera. And that is when we went to a couple of doctors and showed them the scans. So of course, the first response was that this is not good enough quality. And while we and a lot of doctors could see that, okay, this is okay, whereas when the moment a diagnosis needed to be done, it wasn't good enough. So at that point of time, we realized, okay, our first version we built, it took us around 3-4 months to build an entire scanner that where a camera with an optic setup moves in 3D, can focus to some extent automatically, take pictures, stitch them together, put it on a screen. And where you can give a Google Maps kind of a user experience to the doctor that, okay, you can zoom in, zoom out, you can pan around on a tissue slide or a blood slide. But of course, the moment they zoomed in, they realized that, okay, this is not working. So then our question was that, okay, what is broken here? Of course, the 3D printing part was not broken because we are translating and tissue is working, right? So the most common thing was, okay, our camera and the optic setup has some issues. Next, we realized, then we went fairly deep, far deeper into how do we get a good quality image. And our first sense was the camera resolution may not be translating to the quality that we need. So we kept iterating on cameras. Now the question was, the biggest problem, India doesn't have a great industrial camera manufacturer. In fact, India doesn't have an industrial camera manufacturer. So each of our camera experiments would mean that we ask someone, we buy something, we try it, and then we we reject it, and then we return it, or we ask them for another one. This cycle was fairly complex, right? That and this made us very slow. So one of the easiest ways to do that was we just ordered some 5 cameras which we thought will work, and we had to make do with one of them. So that's the first thing we did, and we did find a camera after enough theoretical research that went into like the manufacturing of a camera. What is a lens size? What is the lens aperture size? What is the exposure that is possible, and how does that translate into our setup? That's one. But there is no real way to be certain about how it translates to our setup, because post the camera there is this entire optics setup. While we tried 5 cameras, and we had 5 cameras, each costing north of 1 to 2 lakhs firstly. And but when we tried this, we realized that okay, after a point we realized it is not the camera that is the issue, it is the optic setup. Now then the next start thing that personally I had to go deeper into optics. Like I was solving optics equations that we learned in JE, but much complex ones, to try to figure out what the optics setup should be. And turns out we learned that optics is not just about the lens. It is about the quality of glass. It is about like the precision with which you can keep two glasses together without it moving around. And even a degree of movement will spoil the quality, because when we talk about a microscope replacement, we are working in a nanometer range. And when you're working in a nanometer range, and even a degree of change can make the image really bad. So that's another aspect. So while we figured that what lens do we need, what power lens do we need, we couldn't figure out that, okay, who can manufacture it? We gave it to some 20 manufacturers in India, but none of them gave us the quality that we needed. At some point, we finally realized that, okay, we need to probably figure out someone who does this already, right? And then we figured out a manufacturer of a German company in India for microscopes, and we had to give them the exclusive license that you manufacture for our use case, and you keep doing that. So that and this entire journey of just figuring out the camera and optics tube took around like 8 months. And this was without any fundraising. There was no fundraising, because anyone that like at this point we were it was 8 months into my 8 months into this company, and the company had stayed for around, I think, 14 months by now, and there was no funds that we had raised by now. But with this effort, at least we had figured out how to get the quality. Now, when we got the quality, we realized, okay, now let's go and raise funds. The moment we started raising funds, the biggest problem was that we didn't really have a customer. We had some minimum viable feedback, but we didn't have a customer. And the reason we didn't have a customer was because the machines that we made were still prototypes. They were not ready to sell. So while we were trying to raise funds, we realized that, okay, getting into the VC set of things makes no sense, because they want traction on anything before it makes sense. And also like the cycle time for a startup like Morphle Labs for a VC may not sit at that point of time. So the easiest way was eventually we figured some grants and some angels who get some funds going. So by the end of around 10, 12 months of Morphle with me, we had raised around, probably not a very, very pessimistic 1 crore. And that's where we are. So post that, we decided that, okay, now we have an MVP, it works. There are hospitals and medical colleges in India, in Bangalore itself, who were using it daily. So then we realized, okay, we can start selling. Then started our sales cycle. Now the challenge starts that when you start your sales cycle, we had one machine that worked. We created another machine that goes to sales. And reproducing a machine is non-trivial, because we make so many iterations and hacks in order to make sure that one machine works. Is that reproducing a machine was not a non-trivial effort. So there was one machine that works. We left with that. I personally left with that in a car, and decided, okay, let me go and sell it. And I drove with another person across South India, going from college to college, a lab to lab, and hospital to hospital, just demoing the machine. But of course, this is the prototype version. It keeps breaks every day. So every time before the demo, I would sit and repair the machine, like, and then break. And this breaking of machine can vary from like a software bug to that there is some tuning parameter that for the machine to work had broken, or to some hardware actual piece that got broken. So we also, during this entire my trip across South India, they would keep couriering me replacement parts from Bangalore, that okay, now fix this and fix this. And of course, I am primarily from like software plus AI background, whereas AI background, and often I didn't know how to assemble, and they would teach me how to assemble on the go on video calls so that I can quickly repair it and keep it running. So now, while we were doing this entire sales cycle, often what would happen is that I would show a demo, and the customer would be like, okay, why don't we use it for a day? And I would sit there for a day, like around 8 to 10 hours for a day, or sometimes 2 days, trying to help them, teach them how to build it. And as I'm teaching them, I realize, okay, this is not working, this is not working, this is something they need, and I would keep building them. So by the end of around 3 months of me on the road, I had shipped some 100 features for different customers in different ways, in completely hacky ways. So at some point I was maintaining some 15 to 20 branches per customer, that okay, of code, that okay, this is working, this is working, this is working. This is just on the software layer, because I had just shipped so many features, and it was not possible to keep merging the features from customer to customer either, because often they would have just different kinds of needs. But at the end of 3 months, the good part was we had around 10 to 15 orders. And 10 to 15 orders for a medical device is fairly good, because each device would have like around 15 lakhs to 20 lakhs of sales price. And our cost of goods was barely around 3 to 4 lakhs at that point of time. So, which was a very good conversion that we had. And now, post this sales cycle with these many orders, I came back to Bangalore. Now, the question is, we have to start shipping those 50 machines. And as I said before, we didn't really know exactly how to reproduce our machines, because there were so many changes, so many hacks that would keep going. It was very hard to keep a version. And now, so there was so much of debt collected on the mechanical engineering, on the electronics engineering, on the software, that everything was all over the place. But we have to ship 15 machines in the next 1 to 2 months, because that's the commitment we had to make. Because without that, our company cannot run, because like we need more runway to keep having more, keep making more machines, and keep selling more orders. Now, along with this, there was another challenge that we realized the moment I reached office in Bangalore, was that okay, now we need to iterate on software and hardware together. But you cannot really iterate on software without having the hardware working, and you cannot really iterate on the hardware without opening it up. So now the first problem was that okay, we give a machine purely to software, and by this time we were 3 to 4 member software team, and we give a machine of two entirely to software, that okay, you work with this machine and keep iterating over it. While they would do that, hardware would keep fixing their tech debt, or keep adding, improving the design, because you have to design that can be manufactured now, because you have to ship 15 machines. But every time this would happen, every time there was a handover to software, you would realize that the new piece of code doesn't work on the new piece of hardware, because there is enough amount of parameters that goes in when you build a robotics setup. And those parameters, of course, did we know all those parameters at that point of time? No, we had to keep learning them, keep iterating over them. And we built tools and testing rigs to get those parameters easily. We had to unblock the software team again and again, so that a software team can keep focusing on those features, because at the end of the day, the user wants those software features, but they only work when the hardware is reliable, and that hardware can keep working with the right accuracy. So, and those iterations kept taking enough number of time, but of course we were limited on time. So by the end of, I think, 2 months, we had around 5 machines, but all 5 machines were practically different machines from the hardware standpoint, because each had some feature that came in, but because of speed we had to keep shipping them. And we had literally 5 machines with different code, different hardware, different peripherals shipped to 5 different places. So what does this mean? We had 5 machines with customers working, sometimes working in different ways at 5 places, 5 places across the country, each with its own code, own hardware, and own ways. In fact, I remember one of those machines, we had put a camera inside the machine to see how the camera machine is working, just so that we can get a sense of that, okay, what is actually going, what is can go wrong, and when is it really going wrong. And that's so at this point we had converged from like some 20 different pieces of code to 5, but they were still 5 different machines that we were running. So we had called these we our I had named these machines from Pokemon, and each of them had a Pokemon dash customer where it is shipped, and that was my branch name. And I still to date remember, okay, this branch has this button here, this button here, and this branch has this thing shipped, and I still remember. And because that was day in day out what we were trying to do, but of course this wouldn't scale. So post this first 5 machines that we had, and we figured that this will not this is not going to scale. We realized, okay, now we need to go back to the drawing board and build for a scaled production, because by this time orders have started coming in. By this time we have got better around like what works, what do people want, what is the hardware that works, and what mechanical design, what electronics, they were somewhat sorted. But yet now we have to keep making them. We have to reach. Then our goals shifted from, okay, while these customers who are there, we have to keep them happy. Our goals shifted completely to that, okay, I need to keep shipping 2 machines a week. Now, how do we ship 2 machines a week? It is a whole different ball game altogether, because now it comes in challenges like while we were building everything at a small scale, like I would 3D print things, we would make 2 copies of things by pulling in favors from Pina in Bangalore, Pina manufacturers in Bangalore. But at some point, when we had to do 2 to 3 a week, this wasn't possible. So we have to for the electronics aspect of it things. We couldn't because we knew there were issues. So we had to take a trade-off as to, okay, we will live with these issues, and these are the design choices that we will make. But while we live with these issues, there were still 3 to 4 versions that we have to keep maintaining, because our past customers exist and we have to keep fixing for them also. So the design has to take into account what exists, what debt exists, and we can keep replacing them. We have enough spare parts for them, and we can reuse those spare parts. And that meant that we are setting up literally 4 to 5 supply chains, assembly lines. And while we were setting up 4 to 5 assembly lines, that also meant that the humans at the end of the day are the same. The humans are making a lot more errors. The humans are making a lot, like the assembly is different for 4 to 5. And the speed, we are not getting the speed needed. And humans are not, it's not intuitive for humans to start assembling. Now, how do we know where do we draw the line? So we had to started building SOPs and unit tests as to, okay, this version of the machine works with this setup. This is the test that you need to run. If it fails, do this. If it doesn't, do this. And that process setting with around 5 people who are managing the assembly line was a fairly complex thing. And mind you, it wasn't just the assembly line part of that happens inside the office. There is enough that goes to the 20 vendors that you have, that, okay, you send them, they manufacture something, it comes, you have to QC it, that, okay, like, is this worth using? Is it not worth using? You go back. And this maintaining all of this with the time crunch that you are living with the resource crunch that you're living with the drift that you have, that there is so much of drift, it was a nightmare at one point of time to sort this. And the only way this finally got sorted to some extent, I don't think it is ever fully sortable, but it does is we kept reducing our drift. You keep reducing the drift as much as you can. Like 4 5 versions, 4 versions, 3 versions, 2 versions. There's only one version that needs to be shipped. I don't think even Morphle Labs today has one version that ships. It probably has 2 to 3. But the difference between 2 to 3, I hope, is far lower than what it was when this was in 2000, I think 19 beginning. So that's one. Now the company reached a different stage. While we had figured this to some extent, there is some operations going into this, there is sales that is working, the flywheel has started running. Now the problems come in the strategy aspect of things. While everything is running right, each customer will have a different requirement, and especially in this domain, when you're buying a when you're when you're buying a sorry, yeah, especially in this domain, when you're buying a 15 lakh machine or a 20 lakh machine, and as we kept adding more machines which are higher capacity, right? The customer will not compromise on their requirements. There is very hard for a customer to compromise on requirements, and each customer will have some nitty-gritty change according to their requirements. Some customer would want, okay, I integrate with my system. Some customer will want, no, give me a printer attached to this. Some customer will want, give me a reporting attached to this. Some customer will give me a UI attached to this where I can do reports. And couple of these are requirements, couple of these are sales blockers, couple of these are just promises of the sales team that you have to keep matching, because the conversions are supremely critical. So at that point, there was a time where we had to come to the from a strategy standpoint that, like, we need to stop doing enough projects and we need to start looking at it that this is our product. Outside this, what is within our scope and what is not? Because of course, adding more reporting features, adding more mail features, reminder features are all like are peripherals to the real product. But what is the product? So that is something where we had to finally come to the drawing board and decide that when do we draw the line, that these are things that the customer wants and I'm not going to give them. They have to figure out other ways, and these are things I don't. And what that brings in as a challenge to any company at that point of time is that doing a project based setup doesn't scale, because you are not going deeper into solving the real depth of the problem. For example, we had a prototype working of a cervical cancer diagnosis pruning tool. Like if someone had, like, we could from a very accurately tell that, okay, this slide doesn't have a cervical cancer, so don't even show it to a doctor. But there is no time to iterate over this because you are still pandering to a customer's needs. And there was you cannot very go deeper into this product, and at some point you have to draw the line. So at this point was when, like, while over time I was trying to draw the line, because personally it made a lot more sense from a strategy point standpoint for me to keep getting deeper into solving the problem for a doctor, but to keep going sales, keep getting in money into the bank, keep getting, there were enough project based things that you have to do, and this balance was very hard to strike. And at some point, because I was still a full early engineer, I did not have the autonomy to put my foot down as to that, okay, this is something that I don't want to do. And at that point, I decided that maybe it is time that I have taken this entire setup, that I move out of this space and probably find something else. And that's how after I think 2 years in Morphle, I parted ways with Morphle, because the project was versus product as a strategy problem wasn't something I could solve there and I couldn't align there. So now coming, like just to summarize on most of the learning that came from my Morphle journey was, one, component sourcing has to be a first class citizen. Like the idea that where is a component coming from, having a QC in place, taking into account the lead time of each component, taking into account the complexity of the component, the cost of the component, and still shipping things. It needed to be a first class in your product design roadmap. Like component sourcing cannot happen outside or someone else doing it. It is part of your product design. Then feature drift. Feature drift, as I one of the major learnings from me from Morphle was maintaining n number of versions of the same thing is an extremely painful thing. And in hardware, it is, if you think having this different in software is hard, in hardware it is far, far more complex, because the reconciliation is just not possible often. Like you cannot just merge hardware, like this piece doesn't go with this piece cannot replace this piece, so this parameter itself doesn't exist on this version of the machine. So this is an extremely expensive thing, and keeping it at minimal from day one is something that I didn't know pre-Morphle. And today if someone asks me, I know for a fact that you got to do this. Next, the Indian fundraising ecosystem is far more brutal when your gestation cycle is long, because if your investment today comes investment comes today, they would want a return in at least a year, in some way, or a growth in some way. And that is very hard when you're dealing with hardware, because if your product iteration takes 2 months, you cannot expect you'll get a 10x in a year. And that is another major learning that I had from this journey, was that, okay, we need to look at fundraising differently for hardware. We cannot be expecting the same seed, series A, series B growth of valuations that you do for a hardware. You cannot, like, if some analogies I drew from US was that a lot of series B hardware companies are there in US who still have 5 customers, and that brings you perspective that, okay, maybe series B with 5 customers in hardware is a very normal thing. In India, that is unheard of. And it's also because of the maturity of the fundraising ecosystem, and not a lot of successes have the ecosystem seen. But that's the reality of it is today, that your fundraising strategy is very different when you're looking at a hardware and how you what metrics you choose and when do you raise the next fund is fairly different. Next big learning for me from Morphle was that hardware is 70% ops. And I think that changed my perspective towards the hardware business or a robotics business completely. That it is 70% ops, because while you can build a prototype, while you can build a kick-ass product that solves cancer diagnosis to some extent, to scale it, there is n number of operational challenges that keep coming in, like from sourcing to production to delivery to QC. It needs to be run like a very tight ship supply chain. It needs to be run like the discipline that is needed, how a supply chain org looks like a very very military like org, and that is how it needs to be run. And it is not trivial to run it that way. It itself is a skill in itself, which is not easy to find. And that is another learning, and that's something that is weighed so heavily on me that I made sure that the journey after that I go to an operations org, which I'll come to. And the last learning from a strategy standpoint was when and how to transition from a project to product. The first question is, do you want to transition? Because it is an important question, because like you can always be a core hardware and services company, and there is a good business there. It is an amazing business there. There is no doubt, no harm in making a business that way. It is great. But there is a trade-off that we are making at that point of time. The trade-off is that you can own the 100% piece of the pie in the vertical, but you are going on the horizontal. And that trade-off, you need to be very cognizant about that. You are making that trade-off, why you're making that trade-off, how you're making that trade-off, and what it means for the company. Because it changes how you see the company, it changes how you fundraise, it changes how you hire, it changes how your books look. So all of these are it is a question that you need to keep asking yourself after a point in a hardware business, that where are you. In fact, the biggest hardware, I have talked to enough robotics founders in the world right now, and everyone goes through this phase, everyone, because the iteration time is slow. You build for a customer first, and then you build for the product. And those things, that transition is an extremely important step that needs to be made if you want to make that transition. Or maybe you don't want to make that transition, and that is something that needs to be ingrained as the company within the culture, that okay, we will do what the customer wants. So that's primarily the learnings from Morphle. I'll move to my next. So after Morphle, I realized a couple of things that I realized, that is, one, fundraising is a beast that I did not want to touch because I didn't know enough about it. Two, operations is hard, and I wanted to get into somewhere where operations is at least easier for me. And third, I wanted a lot more autonomy on what is being built, how it is being built, and why it is being built. So with that, I actually surprisingly, and I was lucky enough to get an opportunity to start the robotics slash automation team at Udaan. Udaan, as some of you would know, was a fairly is a fairly big mid-stage startup with a good enough team, fairly big team. Its supply chain is core to Udaan, and it made a lot of things easier for me when I joined because I had a customer who knew his problems and I could solve for it. I did not need to figure out the problems of the customer because I had the customer access all the time. I did not have to get into the fundraising complexities because like it was a funded company and I was a smaller team that I was starting up within Udaan. And third was like it gave me a path or a possible path in retrospect that this can become a separate business for Udaan. And that was the dream that I joined Udaan with. And why? What kind of products was I trying to build at Udaan? So Udaan is a B2B supply chain, B2B e-commerce supply chain company. So it is big. It has big enough. It has 300 warehouses. It is big enough from a problem standpoint that okay, there is warehouses. There are some 5 different kinds of warehouses. There is for a food. There is for fresh. There is for pharma. There is for transport centers, which is in between warehouses where people where just which is just as a transition warehouse. So there is enough breadth of things that you can tackle. So at that point, like when we joined, the first thing that when I joined, I was the first person, and I started when I joined. First thing I was given was okay, you find your problem that you want to deal with. And what we figured over the time, over my 3 years at Odaan, we had expanded to around 4 products. Three of them, one was like capturing the volumetric weight, like getting the length, breadth, height, and weight of an item very easily as part of the process in the warehouse. The second was a goods to person system. Grey Orange is a fairly popular big company that builds a goods to person system. And we were trying to build a goods to person system for Udaan. And why we chose to build it was purely because the cost just doesn't sit well for an Indian company of a Grey Orange or anything of that sort today. So we had to start think from scratch as to okay, what does a goods to person system for India look like? Because an Indian unit economics look very different from a US unit economics or a European unit economics. And third was we wanted to like another aspect of Udaan was the Udaan or any supply chain is the quality of fresh food because fresh is a perishable. You need to transport it very quickly. So we wanted to measure quality of fresh at different points in the supply chain, and that these are the three major products that we built, and each is at its own journey of maturity as a product. So from a standpoint, as I said, the first was to find the problem. So finding the problem was not very hard because there were enough problems out there. There were enough corollaries in the Western market which we could piggyback on. Okay, this works there. Then how will this work here? Will the unit economics work or not? We figured that out. And from there, we had figured out that these are the problems. So from there, we decided that, okay, we chose a one big problem that we have, one big as in long gestation problem and one small gestation problem. So the volumetric weight capture was a small problem. Like we knew that we could ship it in in 1 or 2 months. And we also knew that, and the other one was a goods to person system, which we thought would take around 6 months. But of course, while we shipped the length, the volumetric weight capture, one machine, everything worked, and we were ready to scale. What happened? This was 2020. And what happened? There was COVID. COVID brought in a tons of challenges for the hardware market. It completely changed like all my learnings that I had done before, and we were using all of them. But at the end of the day, the world was at a standstill. So the first challenge that was what happened was all vendors had paused. There was no work being done. But while the vendors had paused, the Udaan's scale had increased because the world moved more e-commerce. So the need for automation increased far more because there was a lockdown. but the manufacturing stopped completely. So the scaling got blocked completely. So while we could, these scaling issues, like for 3 to 4 months, we were at a standstill. We did not ship anything. We just couldn't because of the way the first lockdown was done. At that point, and not just that, but in the 3 to 4 months, our vendors not only paused, some shut down because they couldn't rotate the money. Like how any manufacturing works is they get an order. On the basis of that order, they usually have some money in the bank. They use that money in the bank to fund those orders, and then they get paid later. Now this cycle, if it blocks for some 3 months, the vendors had shut down. Most vendors could not survive COVID, and that meant that okay, while despite all my learnings on that, keeping drift less and all of that, we at the end of the day did not have vendors to manufacture. So at that point, I had to take a call that, okay, can I create new vendors? New vendors were very hard to find because none of the vendors had really money in the bank at that point of time. And they wouldn't take orders of a small scale. And this was my first product. So my scale was 5 machines, 10 machines at max sometimes, not more than that. And that, so finding vendors became impossible. So I had to take a call that, okay, let me do this. Let me build manufacturing expertise in house. So we actually, couple of vendors that shut down, we hired them on our payroll, and we decided that, okay, you build this, you figure this out. And that unblocked us for the next level of the first product. And we could ship the first product, but from our first version to finally shipping 10 took us around 9 months of 2020. And in parallel, while we were working on 2 products, so the moment the 2 products started happening, and often because one product had seen a win, we started getting requests that, okay, can you build this? Can you build that? So we decided, and probably I was immature and or a premature decision, we expanded to 3 products at different stages. One was at the maintenance stage and support stage. The other was at a very, very complex design stage. And the third was at a prototype stage. Now, 3 products maintaining became a team problem. That one, because they are at a different stage, it has to go work with the operations within the org. It has to work with the procurement, has to be happened on time. The payment has to happen so that everything happens. So I built a team of around 15 folks with a completely heterogeneous team, which had operations folks, procurement and program management folks, of course, product folks, and then engineering. Even engineering had sub-disciplines that, okay, there is a specific mechanical engineer who understands manufacturing. Also, there is an electronics designer, there is an electronics like hands-on assembly person, and then there are software engineers. Even software had layers different, because you want a controls algorithm software person, you want a systems engineer, and then you want a and then you want a common software engineer who's going to integrate with the systems. And along with this, there was enough that I needed to set up a support infrastructure, because often like there were, like when you have shipped 10 machines across 10 places, each place has its own challenges, and each warehouse has its own challenges of learning how to use the machine. So you have to set up a support infrastructure where any issue is sorted, like from a standpoint of SOP, from a standpoint of knowledge gap, from a standpoint of if there is an actual hardware issue, software issue, setting up that process, because these machines are being used every day. And even a 5-minute delay in the use of the machine would mean like less money that comes to Udaan for the day. So that machinery needed to work. While Udaan helped massively because of the operations culture that it had, this entire thing was new from a hardware standpoint for Udaan, and this setup needed to be done. And that was another set of problems that we solved. And finally, we had a 12-member team, which is a fairly modest for a hardware team which was running 3 products. And while this worked, while we figured this, we were at a stage where, okay, 3, 4 products running in the warehouses, they were running, we were iterating, we were trying to get goodness. Then came the bigger challenge. The business needs of Udaan kept eventually changed from when we started designing the product and while we were at the stage of the first deployment, and they kept changing. But can we, while the business need is changing, can we pivot that quickly with hardware when the business is changing that fast? Because Udaan at that point of, this is 2020, this we have entered 2022 now. Like suddenly the economic climate in the world changes from, okay, like we have to grow, to the that we have to be profitable. The moment you come at profitability, the supply chain how it looks changes, the 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 cost centers how it looks changes, the books how it looks changes. Now we have to adjust to this. Now the moment when we start adjusting to this, we started seeing that, okay, we, for us to adjust to this, we will have to make major design changes, and they are at least 6 to 8 month long projects. Can we sustain them? While I tried to keep figuring that out, at some point we realized that this stopped making sense. The entire, all three products, actually out of the four, the biggest product that would give the biggest benefit stopped making sense completely from the supply chain design standpoint. And at that point, we had to take a call that, okay, maybe we need to scale this down. And that's what we did. And that's when we scaled down from three products to two products, then from two products to a single product in purely maintenance mode. And right now, like I personally had to finally let go most of the team who were building this, and to get down to a way that one product just works in a maintenance mode in outsourced fashion, but the team doesn't exist anymore. So from the journey of having four products with around 10 machines on ground, the changes were so that while the 10 machines are still working, right, the team and development team did not have, like, we could not work with a 6 month to 1 year gestation cycle projects because our business changed completely. And that was another major learning that I had post this, was what is that how important timing is, and to time your product right in the market. And you need to understand that the gestation cycle needs to adjust for the market or the customer well. And that was my major takeaway from my Udaan journey. So I think that's primarily how it worked. And yeah, those are my key takeaways from all of my journey. But that's coming to the last question. Like, will I ever do hardware again? Well, yes. I think my current sense is that despite all these challenges, all the learnings, like I have gone through this, and I'm sure there's a lot more for me to learn. But the idea is that there is no better gratification for an engineer when so many different subsystems work together and finally your user uses it and it seems like magic. And that gratification has no match. The other aspect is that the fun in just seeing something live, not just on a screen, working, is has its own level. And third, while it is hard for everyone. So once you are able to make a flywheel up with it, the mode stays for a very long time. Clearly, I probably get back to hardware again. Today, I am not, primarily because I was far too excited with the generative AI space and wanted to see how the world looks from a pure software way. And it, of course, has its own challenges, which I'm going through. But then I also learned that if I have far more autonomy in terms of finance, far more autonomy in terms of, and depth in terms of timing and everything that I have learned, I will probably dive back into hardware again. And that's how where I rest. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on Twitter at InventorSam. And my page is on Hasgeek also, and my credentials would be there.
Thank
Anyone
you,
who has
Soumyadeep.
questions? Yeah.
Yes. Uh, Yes, this has been quite a whirlwind of a ride, and also, I mean, kudos to you for making this so extempore. I think a couple of questions that I had while listening to you. I think one is to kind of recap some of the learnings that you had. And I think that one slide that you particularly shared after your second attempt, which is that there's a fair bit of operations. There's a question of timing, and of course, the one I liked the most was the project to the product transition, which I think also speaks very closely to me as well, and I'm sure it also speaks very closely to a lot of founders. The one question I have is where in the world do you actually see hardware robotics ecosystem thriving, and what are the factors that have contributed to its success?
Right. So I think an ecosystem thriving, I'll break it down into three major aspects. One is the finance aspect. Like, are there people willing to invest in that? In US, there are a number of investors who have understood, internalized, and already have seen a cycle of win with hardware, which has created enough money that flows in. But in India, we have not seen a win with hardware at all for the finance cycle to close, for people to really understand how this money movement will work in this domain, because it's a longer cycle. That's on the finance aspect. The second aspect is from a purely operations aspect, or a let's call it operations aspect. Is the environment suitable to prototype things quickly and ship them? Is it easy to do that? Do we have the capability? India is fairly early in that. For example, even today, even if I have a circuit design, for it to come back fabricated to me takes me 10 days. The same number in China is a few hours. And that 10 days and few hours for changes your way you look at a step in your pipeline completely. If something is few hours, I am okay to make mistakes. If something is 10 days, I'm not okay to make mistakes. And if I'm not okay to make mistakes, then I'm going to take far longer in doing the design. Right. And that's on the circuit side. Similarly, on the manufacturing side, how quick is the prototyping? How easy it is? Well, 3D printing has changed the game completely from a prototyping standpoint, right? But there are more. There is 3D printing can only work to some extent. There is laser cutting, there is inkjet, there is molding and uh, injection molding, and all of this. The community for this to get it quickly is still very hard. Like, I have relationships even today in Pina with manufacturers who will give me, because I have built those relationships. I literally have learned Kannada to some extent to build those relationships. And I am not a Kannadiga. So, and those were things that were very hard for me to even realize that, okay, that is the way we have to run things. Right. And again, something that I have seen in China, that these things are not at all a problem there. Like, you want something in injection molded, you get it in 2 days. You want something laser cut, you get it in a few hours. Like, and there are players in India who are like there is IKP is a good incubator in this domain which tried, but they are far small in number for it to work. For example, we were sitting out of Jalahalli for 2 years in Morphle because the entire manufacturing thing is in Pina. But now my question is, now the third part is hiring, right? If I'm sitting in Jalahalli, how do I hire the best minds of the world? How? Like, people don't want to travel. Like, it's hard to make someone travel from Koramangala to Whitefield or Whitefield to Koramangala. Jalahalli is another city altogether there. And that is another, the third part is hiring. And you have to, and another aspect is hiring in this domain. And generally, the society has made, or big companies like Bosch, which are doing really well in this, have gone into specializations of mechanical engineers, software engineers, electronics engineers. Like, I think electronics hardware engineer is a separate role. For a startup, you cannot have these specializations. You need generic folks, and those generic folks are very hard to find. Like, the way I could hire was primarily because I came from my college, and my college had the same community who used to hack around things. That was my hiring ground. But for me to still be able to pay them the same amount that a Google will do, because that person will get a Google software job also. It's just impossible. And that is only possible if I have that funds that I can. And these three verticals are something where India is at a different stage to get today. And the only way to, I think, solve it is that there has to be wins, and those wins have to put back into the community.
Right. Yeah, I think that sounds like a. I think, yeah, I mean, from that abstraction to real, we'll have to see how that journey maps out. I mean, I'm trying to think about how to formulate this question, but one of the things I'm going thinking back is like back in 2009, 10 when Flipkart started. Part of the reason for its success was also because it built an infrastructure layer, which is supply chain, logistics, etc. For robotics to pick up, or for hardware robotics to pick up in India, are you seeing that this similar layer of infrastructure has to be built? And if yes, who would do it?
Yeah. So I think my personal opinion is Flipkart was able to do it is because they were the poster boy of Indian startup ecosystem. They were able to raise enough funds to do this. And a player like Flipkart for hardware needs to exist in India who would need to step up and do that. And in fact, that was my dream with Udaan Robotics. There was no other dream. That was the dream with Udaan Robotics. But of course, like under the Udaan umbrella came its own challenges. Like it had its own pros and its own cons, but that was the dream, that I want to build that infrastructure layer. Like because of my past experience, I had the supply chain and ops was so sorted for me at Udaan. Like I was not thinking about it at all, and that was all that I was thinking about at Morphle. But again, that came with more challenges. So I think a company needs to be given enough time. A company needs to be given enough resources to do this. I don't know that how do we build like a market, a founder, and the infrastructure has to come together to make this happen. And I haven't seen that great ideas where this can happen in hardware in India, or actually even in the world yet. I haven't seen that good. Like because amount of money that flowed into Flipkart was very high. And that amount of money to flow into something hardware also means that bigger market needs to exist for something, right? That's what is it? I don't have. If I had an idea, I would be doing that today.
Right, right. No, I think, yeah, if it was such an easy problem to solve, everybody
Yeah,
would be doing it.
right.
Right. I don't have any more questions, but I think what you've really opened is a good set of leading questions, and I think as we continue on this track to even hear other founders speak about their journeys, it'll be interesting to see what kind of a groundswell is required, and probably to go back to the last statement you made, which is that what are the big wins we can have that also feed into the community. So thank you so much for taking this time out, and it's very heartening to hear that the failure has also led to a certain amount of resilience, and that I hope that this will help us to kind of build more layer upon layer. So thank you so much for doing this, Amity.
Thanks, Zainab, and anyone in the audience. I'm happy to always help in any way I can from all the learnings I have done.
Right. So if anybody has questions for Soumyadeep, you can post it on hasgeek.com/Anthill Inside /robotics/comments. We will also post this link on Twitter, and feel free to chat with Soumyadeep about questions that you may have. And see you around the next time. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Bye bye.